Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Canadian Football Central, CFL content for the fans, by the fans, and we have our first of two videos on the season preview. We're starting with the East, and Rick, this is going to take a while. I'm actually repping all four teams right now. I got the Alouettes and Argos up right here, got the Red Blacks right here, and the Ticats jersey, so repping the entire East in one video.
I have all teams except for BC for hats. Thanks to our lovely sponsor on the other side of this conversation.
I just don't have Saskatchewan and Toronto, and I'll get Toronto, and Saskatchewan I won't get. So
going. Speaking of which, so we both know a fellow person that's an Argos fan because he asked me this the other day.
Yep.
He will bring one when we come in Ottawa or come in October.
Oh yeah.
He asked me, he's like, does so and so have an Argos hat? And I go,
only thing is that I'm very, very picky about hats, so I might want to take a look at the stuff they got in the team store first.
No, obviously, and then we can just pick it up.
Okay. But
anyways,
we have four teams here that we got to do a full previews on. This will probably go over 30 minutes, at my guess, but we'll see exactly how long it goes. It goes however long it goes. However, we are
5 minutes. Okay, everyone, that's our show.
Yeah, well, I never know. You can't predict it all, but it'll be more than 5 minutes. But our first team that we're going east to west. We are starting with the Montreal Alouettes, Grey Cup champions last year. It hate saying that. Still grinds my gears. Now, this team looks a bit different, but
look forward, not in the past.
There you go, Rick. Words of wisdom with Rick today. Thank you. And the Alouettes are going to have an interesting startup of the season this Thursday against yours truly, Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And so it's funny because it'll be crazy to have arguably the top two teams in the league in terms of Grey Cup contenders. One of them's coming out of week one with a loss and will be 0-1 to start the season. Cody Fajardo was able to lead his team to the Grey Cup last year. Will he be able to do it again? This team is absolutely a contender still. Like, that has not changed. Are there some things that have changed? Austin Mack, one of their star guys, gone. So the question is how they're able to kind of fill in those gaps. But then there's still tons and tons of talent on this roster. So, Rick, how do you feel about the Montreal Alouettes?
I mean, considering that everyone thought that Tevin Jones...
from hold on a second. There we go. Oh, there we go. Background, Alouettes background. You can't see it, but...
yeah. Everyone thought that Tevin Jones coming over from Saskatchewan was going to be the Austin Mack answer. But everyone... Tevin Jones got cut today.
Yes, he did. Yeah, no, actually, can you send me the list of the guys who got cut for each of these teams? Just because it would actually be good for me to have that.
Yes.
I know you kind of send me updates here and there.
Yeah, I will send you the link.
Please do. But, like, if I'm looking, so they still got Tyson Philpott. They still got some other key pieces. Dylan Wynn. How much did Dylan Wynn even play last year with them?
With us, you mean?
Yeah, I guess he was with you guys. So, because I know Dylan Wynn missed a ton of games last year.
Let me pull that up.
Just because Dylan Wynn's a solid...
I sent it to you on Discord, by the way.
Yes, yeah, no, I see that.
So, he had 7 games, 4 tackles, 1 sack with us. He spent... So, out of 6 seasons that he's been with... he's with Toronto for 2 years. He only played 1 full season with Toronto.
Yep.
He's only played 1 full season with us. He had 18, 12, 12, and 7. Now the question is he going to stay healthy? But
absolutely.
The big question is, since we're on the topic of defensive lines, what's going to happen with Sean Lemon this year? Because obviously he is able to play because he...
For now.
For now.
He has an appeal going through the CFLPA. Now, before I go into that, what I think is going to be important, and I'm going to I want to start each of our discussions of the teams with this, is I'm going to go through the final cut of the Montreal Alouettes, every single player that was cut.
Okay.
And so that way we can then afterwards talk about the teams. I just want to get these guys off the table. So if there's players that some people have kind of in their mind, they know that these guys are not making the team. So defensive lineman Jason Milola. Aid Milola. I don't know how to say his name. Wide receiver Frederick Antoine. Defensive lineman Jache Baker. Defensive lineman Kevon Bennett. By the way, I'm going to mispronounce a ton of these names. It is what it is.
Good luck with the
Wide
next
receiver Ramad Chikau Bowman. Defensive back Macon Clark. Wide receiver Nicholas Gendron. Running back Michael Herzog. Wide receiver Tyrone Howell. Wide receiver Tevin Jones. Defensive back Maxime Lavelle. Defensive lineman Aaron Lynch. Defensive lineman what is that first name? Ifanye Maje. Defensive back Darian McKenzie. Linebacker Smoke Monday. Smoke Monday. That's one hell of a name. Holy crap. Linebacker Jalen Moody. Defensive lineman TD Moultrie. Fullback Tanner Nelms. Offensive lineman Justin Ternatine. Wide receiver Jalen Wayne. Those were the final cuts of the Montreal Alouettes. Or at least most of them are, because some of them I'm sure are random people because I mispronounced those names halfway to hell. But
so the interesting thing for that is Aaron Lynch, the defensive lineman.
Yeah, no,
he was a former NFL player.
Yeah, I was about to say I think me and you had this discussion about Aaron Lynch, and so I'm kind of surprised to see him go, but there he is.
Looking at this list, so Frederick Atani and Michael Herzog, those are their 5th and 6th round picks from this spring's rookie draft. That have been cut. So just because you get drafted doesn't necessarily mean you make the team.
Now, before we go a little further, I just want to go through some of the guys going to the practice roster as well as some who are suspended. So, on this practice roster, there's defensive back Miles Brooks, wide receiver Jose Barbin, quarterback James Morgan. He was the one who actually played this Friday. Running back Stevie Scott III, wide receiver Tijon Lindsay, defensive lineman Donald Ventrelli, defensive lineman Jordan Dominic, linebacker Latavius Brini, defensive back Tyson Copeland, defensive lineman Mike Arone, kicker Jose Maltos, and punter Sam Clark. Then suspended. This is going to be returning to university, but the Alouettes retain their rights for 2025. Is defensive back Vincent Delisi, I think, which is from Laval, and wide receiver Mohsen Jamal from Western University. So, just wanted to kind of get.
So in other words, out of their draft class this year, 5 and 6 got cut, 7 and 8 went back to school. So 1, 3, and 4 made the team.
That's right.
If they got signed.
Yep, and honestly, it looks like the Alouettes are kind of taking a similar approach to the Bombers in the sense of bring some guys in, be able to really establish a core level of talent, win the Grey Cup, try to keep as many guys as you can afterwards, and then at that point fill in those spots with rookies and hope that those guys can shine. Because you can have guys that can come through that system and work well. It doesn't always work, but I mean, look at a guy like Dalton Schoen. We're talking about a top-level receiver in the CFL. And that's exactly how the Bombers found him. You know, this is a guy who just absolutely tore it up in training camp, who tore it up in the preseason, decided to keep him in, and he just kept getting those yards. He was able to get the long ball when Kenny Lawler was not on the Bombers when he had spent that season in Edmonton. So seeing Montreal take that same approach and try to kind of build their team that way, I think is a very, very smart decision on behalf of the Alouettes organization.
Looking at their receiving core, Reggie White was on the same team last year. Speaker was on the same team. Sneed was on the same team. Rambo's new this year. Phil Potts on the same team. Lecture Jr. I want to say he's new, but he could be on the same team last year. Julian Grant's on the same team. And then there's
Absolutely.
two other receivers that are on the same team. So they only have two new receivers. And I honestly think after I seen how well Rambo did, I think that will be your, like, not Austin Mack-ish. Like, everyone on the team will pick up the slack from where that Austin Mack left behind. But
well, I mean, it's one of those things where I think Rambo has shown that he's not necessarily going to always be that guy who's going to be taking those short passes and getting those short gains, but a guy that you can reliably send down the field, throw the ball at him, and he's going to be able to get you those big grabs of yardage, which Austin Mack was very, very good at last year. Tyson Philpott was able to do pretty solid at it well, but Austin Mack was definitely the star when it came to that. So if you can even have a guy who can fill in those shoes somewhat and then have the rest of the receiver core bring that up, I think that's definitely an advantage for the Montreal Alouettes. And
then if you think about it, they don't just have one running back this year. They have three: Antwi, Fletcher, and Sean Thomas Ellington.
Yep.
So it's not just Stanback. You'll probably see all three rotate in.
Absolutely. No, I think you'll definitely see some rotation in that aspect. Now, if I'm taking a look here at the Alouettes, like what would we say probably was their team's weakness last year? Their weak point on that roster.
I want to say their offensive line.
Their offensive line? Yeah.
Because if you remember me last year.
I think you had a counter, right?
I had between Fajardo and Mack. No, Fajardo and Crum were the two most sacked quarterbacks. Yeah. If I can remember last year.
Although I remember you also did a bit of tracking between Cody Fajardo and Cody Fajardo from when he was in Saskatchewan.
Oh, don't get me wrong. He had 77 sacks the year that he left Saskatchewan.
Yep. No, that was crazy. And he did get sacked quite a lot last year. And so it's going to be one of those things where having an experienced quarterback like Cody Fajardo, who's now proven, because for a while Cody Fajardo has always just been a good quarterback, but he's never kind of been able to proven that he can go that next step, he can win that Grey Cup. But now he has that pedigree. He does. And so the thing is that if I'm the Alouettes, I try to bring in an O-lineman or two. However, it doesn't really look like that was much of what happened. And that it seems like they're just going to kind of rely on I was going to say old reliable, but it wasn't that. It was actually kind of unreliable. But rely on the system they have of where even if the O-line isn't the greatest, Cody Fajardo was able to do enough work with it to get themselves a Grey Cup last year. So they might try to just continue on that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And just continue with that method. But I don't know if that would work 2 consecutive years. So we'll have to definitely keep an eye on the offensive line for the Alouettes.
One last thing is,
yep,
if you're a Riders fan, so you let go of Jason Moss, he becomes the head coach in Montreal. Mm-hmm. You release Cody Fajardo, he goes to Montreal, they win a Grey Cup, and you're still sitting there.
If I'm not gonna lie, if I'm Saskatchewan, could you be upset? Yes. However, I would also argue that the Saskatchewan Roughriders has had an excellent offseason with all the moves, all the talent that they brought in, with the coaching change that was desperately needed in Saskatchewan. I think if you're Saskatchewan, focus on your own franchise, and you got a lot to be excited about in this coming season in the disgusting green that is. But I think, so one last thing I think what we should cover about the Alouettes is, when it comes to the Alouettes, how do we think they place in the East this year? My prediction is first. I think they win the East.
Without going into all the other teams, I'd say top 2 at least.
Top 2? Yeah. I really, really think that the Alouettes are going to
because
win the East. I think they're going to win the East quite definitively, to be honest. I think they'll have a decent gap. I think there's going to be a closer battle between 2 and 3.
So here's the thing. It does, when it comes to playoffs,
Yep.
It does not matter where you finish.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just saying
look
where
at
I
last
guess.
year with the Argos. They
The
were
Argos just fell
16
apart.
and 2,
I don't know.
and they crapped the bed in the playoffs. So I mean, it is what it is.
That's what it is. That's right. It is what it is. But I think it is time we go on to our next team, which is the Ottawa Red Blacks, which are in a interesting state in the sense of they keep having decent off seasons where they look like they acquire this talent and they're going to do something with it, and then they just don't. And now, one thing that you texted me this earlier today that's interesting is the absolute roulette table full of quarterbacks.
5 quarterbacks.
You said, is it 5? I thought you said.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now.
Oh, okay, because you told me
you
told me 6 earlier. However, I'm gonna go through and we're gonna start. I'm gonna start with their release players, and I'm gonna name their practice roster. Okay.
Okay.
So released and cut in the final cuts by the Ottawa Red Blacks was defensive back Abu Darami Soare. Defensive back Jalen McLean Sapp. Defensive back Tawan Francis. Defensive back Deshaun McNary. Defensive back Jordan Jones. Linebacker Caleb Oliver. Defensive lineman Divine Obasher. Defensive lineman Jared Willis III. Defensive lineman Carson Taylor. Defensive lineman Alexander Fedchen. Long snapper Simon Chaves. Receiver John Vay Johnson. Receiver Andre Miller. Not the Rangers defenseman, Andre Miller. Or no, that's Keandre Miller. I'm getting confused. Very close name, though. Receiver Ryan McDaniel. Receiver Shaquan Bloomfield. Receiver Daniel Perry. Running back Ronnie Brown. Offensive lineman Austin Myers. Offensive lineman Samuel Jackson. Which that screws with me because I just think Mace Windu. Offensive lineman Cooper Hamilton. And then going to the practice roster for the not the Alouettes, the Red Blacks, is defensive back Dawson Pierre, defensive back Yanni Godfill, defensive back Eli Stove, defensive back Adrian Fry, defensive back Bennett Williams, a lot of DBs, linebacker Zachary Fillion, linebacker Heston Lametta, running back Kylan Hill. Offensive lineman Eric Starceza. Offensive lineman Drake Centers. Offensive lineman Hector Zapeta. Offensive lineman Isaac Moore. So those are the guys moving to the practice roster. Now, what do we think of these final cuts? Anything
so
shocking?
No one stands out for me on that. But
I think Darami Soare was on the team last year. Am I wrong on that? I'm pretty sure he was. Unless I might be confusing
So here's the thing. So you have Drew Brown as starting quarterback, Dustin Crum as backup, Drake Dunniway as third. Then you have Jeremiah Mazzoli. I'm assuming they didn't add him to the injured reserve, so I don't know if he's already on the injured reserve.
Yep.
And then Tria Adams is also on the team. So again, I don't know if those two.
You know why I wondered about Darami Soare and why I thought that he might have been on the team last year was because he was on the Bombers last year. That's why I recognize his name. Just because I recognize names, even though I forgot that he was on Winnipeg. I now remember it. He played 5 games, got 23 defensive tackles, forced 1 fumble. But there's so many guys to keep track of.
Here's the thing. So you have Ackland,
yep,
Addison, Dedman, who is an amazing returner, by the way.
Oh, incredible! One of the
Justin Hardy. So there's 3.
Yep.
And then you have Dominic Rhymes 4.
Yep.
And then probably Nick Marner 5.
Do we know the situation? This is important to talk about. Do we know the situation with Dominic Rhymes? He went out with injury in this last game.
I know he left the game. I don't know because here's the thing. They have a first week bye. So his injury could be nothing going.
It could be just precautionary more than anything. Got a little rattled, don't want to risk it, pull him out now. Could be that.
But the good thing about having a first week bye is everyone has film on everyone.
Yep.
Except for that team.
No, that's actually a massive advantage. And so they won't play first week. Obviously, again, they got that first week bye. But their second week will be against the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. They'll have a home game, their home opener, against Winnipeg on the Thursday, June 13th. And then from there, they will have to see exactly how that goes.
Also, they brought in Darius Bladek from Toronto for their offensive line.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure.
Just going to
Isaac Moore came over from Calgary.
Yep.
I don't know of any other people. No other offensive line jumps out at me.
Yeah.
They also have.
Are you talking about their offensive lineman?
Yeah, I'm just going through like all the.
Drew Desjardins, excellent. This was it's actually
but he was already on the team last year.
Yeah. No, you're talking about guys that are new. No, I'm not. I'm not sure exactly where you're.
And then there's Darius Pickett. He came in from Toronto last year.
Yep.
And Knox was already here.
Santos Knox, yeah, he was already here.
Like, there's. You know what, though? Like, I honestly think everyone's overhyping Drew Brown. And there's nothing.
That's fair.
There's nothing on this team.
Like, you know what the thing is? Like, I think there are some people overhyping Drew Brown. And I say that as an avid lover of Drew Brown. I love me some Drew Brown. Guy can be pretty clutch. And he plays well under that. That's where I think Drew Brown actually is a bit underrated, is where people don't realize that this is a guy where when you put him in a tough situation, or necessarily even if he's not starting that game and you bring him in and you have a difficult situation, he'll be able to manage it. It's when he plays the full 60 where I get a little bit worried about Drew Brown. And I get worried about having that proper coverage in front of him when it comes to that line. So with Drew Brown, I feel pretty solid with him as a starter. It might be one of those things where in terms of him fully blossoming, he might take another year. I'm not necessarily sure that he is that guy this year. Now, the question, though, is that with a guy like Dustin Crum, who spent a lot of time as the starter last year, just due to just a absolute crap ton of injuries, and with a guy like Jeremiah Mazzoli now possibly might be coming back after injury after injury after injury, seemingly for Jeremiah Mazzoli. Like, do we know the status on Jeremiah Mazzoli, his injury, and how he's doing? And is there a chance that he could be a starting quarterback for this team, despite all his injuries, that I thought would end his football career, but looks like he's still trying to get back and pump some iron?
If I remember correctly,
yeah.
Where did I see it? I could have sworn that they activated him.
Oh, yeah? See him on the roster here.
No. I'm trying to think because I seen him and Adams. Unless it was just an error because I'm not seeing. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so they transferred him on the 8th. Go ahead while I look this up.
Yeah, one thing I will say that is interesting about the situation with Jeremiah Mazzoli is that he's so much of a maybe. And what I mean by that is he the defined starter? No, because they still bring in guys like Drew Brown. They still keep a guy like Dustin Crum around. However, I don't know if you remember this. At the start of this year, early 2024, Jeremiah Mazzoli restructured his deal with the Red Blacks, freeing up some cap space for Ottawa to be able to make that move to get Drew Brown under their moniker. So it's one of those things where it's obvious that I think Jeremiah Mazzoli has a role on this team, even if necessarily he's still injured and he's not able to play. I think him restructuring his deal might be to include some time where maybe he's going to try to help mentor a guy like Drew Brown. I mean, Jeremiah Mazzoli is one of those quarterbacks where he's had some great years, but he's on his way out in the sense of that, maybe he plays this season. If he does, obviously good for him. But realistically, I see 2 years in him at absolute max. in playing football in terms of his career. And so it's one of those things where him transitioning into a role where he can kind of help that quarterback who's going to be filling those shoes, I think is a really, really good spot for him. So I wonder if he's going to be doing any of that. I think it's entirely possible.
I finally found it. So on May 28th, which is probably like 5-6 days ago,
Yep.
him and Adams were added from the injured veterans list. Don't know why that is. So they, until they are put on the injured reserve list,
Yep.
they're still both active on the roster.
Interesting. And the thing is that this Red Blacks team has a lot of decent pieces when it comes to its offense. I think the big question for Ottawa is going to be, can they defend? Can they defend? And so, Rick, how do you feel about the defense here on the Red Blacks?
I mean, it doesn't scream second place,
and
it doesn't scream third place. I honestly think everything's going to come down to Dustin Brown this year.
Drew Brown.
I'm thinking of the
you said you did Dustin Crum and Drew Brown, and you mixed the names up.
But yeah,
it all comes down to Drew Brown.
Drew Brown. If Drew Brown doesn't come out of the gate,
I don't think it all comes down to Drew Brown. I think part of it comes down to Drew Brown in terms of really making this offense blossom. But if Drew Brown plays his best game, but the defense can't stop anything, like I think if you're the Red Blacks, you're hoping that a guy on your defensive side of the ball has a breakout season and really, really shines in the CFL this year.
Just looking at their first 4 weeks. Okay.
Yep.
So, by week 1, at home against Winnipeg.
Yep.
Week 2, on the road against Montreal. Week 3.
Well, week 2 they're at home against Winnipeg.
Yeah. Week 1 they're on the bye.
Oh, I thought you said week 1 that they were against Winnipeg. Sorry.
No, they're at home against Winnipeg. Week 2. On the road against Montreal. Week 3.
Yep.
At home against us. Week 4.
Correct.
And then they're on the road against you guys, week 5. So, I mean, realistically, they could be 0-5 to start the season.
Yeah, no, that's a difficult start to the season. And I think if you're the Ottawa Red Blacks, the one thing you want to avoid more than anything is falling into that Edmonton Elks slide that they had last year, where they really, really had a bad start to the season. And even though they were able to salvage it near the end, it was one of those things where it was just too little too late. And so if I'm the Red Blacks here, I think you want to start strong. I think having a statement win against a team like the Bombers or Ticats or whatever would be really, really key. I mean, hell, they were able to do it last year. They were able to get it done with Dustin Crum. So
what I will leave off, one last comment before we move on to another team, is this is the make it or break it year for Bob Dice and Sean Burke. Yep. Sean Burke's been the GM for the team for going on 2-3 years. Bob Dice has been the special teams coach and then the head coach for the last 2 years. If they don't see progress this year, those two are gone.
Yeah, I think if you're Ottawa, your goal is making those playoffs. Seriously.
Oh, and one other thing. I don't have the shirt with me.
Yep.
But this is the first season of the Tommy Condell era in Ottawa.
Oh, so, yeah, I forgot.
Do they sink or do they swim with the Sharks?
Yes, we are all very aware of your opinions on Tommy Condell. But it's one of those things where when it comes to Ottawa's season, it depends on, in my opinion, it depends on 3 things. 3 things. Drew Brown, the defense, and the rest of the East. In the sense of, like, Hamilton's in a bit of a sink or swim situation.
I would even say offensive line. Throw that in there.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Offensive line. Although I will say, I think with the way their offensive line was even last year, they were able to do something with it. It wasn't horrible. But they certainly had some problems, definitely. And honestly, like it's difficult to pin something directly just on an offensive line or just on a quarterback because there's very much that synergy between those two. And then Toronto is a big wild card, so you'll have to see in that regard. But if you're the Red Blacks, like, where do I think they finish?
Fourth.
I think they finish fourth. It's funny. I think there's definitely some strides that they made, but to me, I think they need more time. I think they need more time to develop, and that might spoil the end for what's his name at GM. But
it's not even that. It's Montreal's brought back most of their roster. Toronto's made upgrades. Hamilton's made upgrades. Is Ottawa's upgrades better than Hamilton? You don't know.
And it's one of those things where, like, I think the realistically the team that I think that really is going to define the East in terms of them sinking or swimming is Toronto. Because if they swim, they'll do well. If they sink, they will fall off a cliff. And so we will have to see. Red Blacks last year kind of fell off a cliff. Although I'm going to assume they're going to be hoping for that not to happen this year. But
they threw rafters
further ado,
they threw out rafters out to the ocean and no one could save them.
It is what it is. We will move on to the Toronto Argonauts. That team that
Good note is their roster is updated.
Oh, yeah? Awesome stuff. Now, one thing I will say is to start, let me find
the cuts.
And we'll go through their list of their released as well as their practice roster and then those who are suspended. So, starting with those who were cut today and released from the roster are offensive lineman Nick Amoa, long snapper Blaze Barber, defensive lineman Atlias Bell, wide receiver B.J. Bird, running back Jordan Bird, defensive back Maurice Carnell, defensive back Jarrell Cummings, defensive lineman Ladarius Hamilton, wide receiver Changa Lodge, running back Khan Laborn, defensive lineman Darta Lee, quarterback John Matochka, defensive back Tavares McFadden, offensive lineman Owen Mueller, defensive back Brendan Murphy, fullback Spencer Nichols, defensive lineman Braden Knoll, defensive lineman Ifena Onyeka, linebacker Ifi Onyenem I struggled with that. Defensive lineman Dari Losenthal, defensive lineman Justin Sambu, wide receiver Trey Shropshire, defensive back Chris Steele, and linebacker Kahan Tolson. Moving to the practice roster for the Toronto Argonauts are offensive lineman John Bossy, running back Brandon Culver, linebacker Isaac Darkangelo, defensive back Amani Dennis, punter Jeremy Edwards, kicker Alfredo Gachuz Lozada, defensive lineman Tyson Hergott, defensive lineman Ralph Hawley, defensive back Darius Joyner, wide receiver Justin Marshall, wide receiver Makai Polk, wide receiver Richie Sandani. Suspended list, returning to school, this will be offensive lineman Daniel Shin. And then obviously Chad Kelly has been suspended by the league for a minimum of 9 games, possibly more. But we have to go with the assumption that he's not coming back for the Toronto Argonauts, and that Cameron Dukes is going to be the go-to guy in Toronto this year.
So the one name that stands out from that cut list,
yep,
Tavarius McFadden. So Tavarius McFadden was, if you're looking at the line here on the left side, I think he was either the halfback or corner on the left side. So that's one of the things that stood out for me on there.
Yep.
Let's take a look. So they have Adeleke this year.
Yep.
So Adeleke, Deshaun Amos. Then you have Royce Medici. And I'm missing one other person. Oh, Mason Pierce. Those are the 4 starting defense backs. I'm not sure who the third one is. They also have your former Blue Bomber, Mr.
There's a few.
Do you want to pronounce his first name? Because I'm probably going to butcher it.
Rashid?
Nope. Frederick Hansen.
Oh, I see.
I'm not sure if I butchered that, but anyways.
It's good enough.
They have Jake Serezna that came over in the Curly Gittins Jr. trade.
Yep.
So you have Serezna, Knight, Oakman, and I want to say Robbie Smith on their defensive line. Let's see here. Jonathan Jones and Winton McManus starting their offensive or their linebackers. Yep. Their whole offensive line's back from last year, which is a plus.
Yeah, definitely. Guys like Sean Oakman.
The question is, for
Derek
me,
Parrish.
Does Kadeem Carey first play in his career? Does he play a full season? Because he hasn't played a full season yet.
Yeah, jeez, just too many injuries.
Other than that, I think their strongest position is their wide receivers.
Yep.
So you have Rashid Bailey.
Absolutely.
Deshaun Brissett.
Yep.
DeMonte Coxey. Devarius Daniels. Javarian Grant.
Janarian Grant. Now, one thing I will of note with Janarian Grant, he's a guy that will be used at receiver. However, I would expect that he would definitely play more of a role as a returner. And he is a S tier returner. He's that good, or at least A tier.
So my only 2 questions on if this team is going to sink or if this team is going to swim is the play of Cameron Dukes.
Yep.
And their running backs.
Yeah, no, and it all rests on Cameron Dukes because the running game is going to be decent. It'll be okay, my guess. The thing is that this is a team with a really good offensive line, really good receiving core, but if you don't have a guy who can use that, doesn't matter. And one thing I will say is we talked about the hypotheticals about how Toronto is essentially screwed if Cameron Dukes goes down. And that is sort of true. And what I mean by sort of true is that are there other options for a team like the Toronto Argonauts? And the answer is sort of. And what I mean by that is that there were some decent, name quarterbacks who are not necessarily your ideal starters, but guys that can get the job done, who can do a fine job. And so I would not be surprised if a team like the Toronto Argonauts takes a chance on a guy like Mason Fine in kind of a backup role, in the sense of a guy that can maybe come on and play a little bit here and there if Cameron Dukes gets a little bit shaked. I think he would do well in that role in limited. And it was one of those things where Mason Fine, it's not like every game he played was bad. It wasn't. But it was one of those things where it was just inconsistent. And so if you're the Toronto Argonauts, your question about the consistency of Cameron Dukes, that past Cameron Dukes, there's really not much. So either you got to go and get yourself a quarterback from one of the 10 billion quarterbacks that the Red Blacks are holding on to and not letting go of, or you got to go after a guy like Mason Fine who just got cut and so now he's a free agent, or maybe look and tap in towards maybe the UFL if a guy comes out after their playoffs is done. I think they're in the conference finals right now in the USFL conference as well as the XFL conference. So maybe you try tapping down south. But I think having a backup plan, heaven forbid something happens to Cameron Dukes, is essential here for the Toronto Argonauts, just because of how sink or swim Cameron Dukes is, at least at this point in time.
So here's the interesting thing.
Yep.
So week 1 they play BC at home. Week 2 they have a bye. Week 3 they play Edmonton
BC,
at home.
That's a hard first game.
Week 3, they play Edmonton at home. Week 4, they play Montreal at home.
Yep.
Week 5, they go and play Saskatchewan.
Yep.
Week 6, they play Montreal. Week 7, they play us at home. And then week 8, they play Winnipeg.
So here's the thing. That means, so from what I heard, in the first 6 weeks, they're playing the Alouettes twice. So that will be one of those things where they'll have 2 really, really key matchups.
And they play Winnipeg once and BC once. So there's 4 games
right
there.
Yeah, no, I was just talking in the first 6 weeks.
Oh, okay.
So it's one of those things where I think if you're Toronto, the team that you're scared about is Montreal, in the sense of that Hamilton has the potential to do really good, and we will kind of have to wait and see. Montreal is kind of the team we know Montreal is going to be good, and Montreal at bare minimum is getting first or second in their conference. And so if you're Toronto, it's one of those things where getting at least one of those wins against the Alouettes is a great way to kind of help solidify the Argonauts as the number 2 team in the East. Because the thing is that I think that Toronto is, if Cameron Dukes plays the way that he can and he plays to the best of his abilities, this team will come out second in the East. The problem is, though, is that if they start running into consistency issues, if they start running into issues in the defense, even though they do have some great pieces there, this is where a team like Hamilton could really move and put themselves into that second spot and get back into kind of having having home field advantage in the playoffs. You can see this is where I've been watching so much playoff hockey. But they'll have home field advantage going into that first round of the playoffs. And so I think if you're Toronto, again, it all rests on Cameron Dukes. Chad Kelly's situation doesn't look good. Doesn't look like it's going to get any better for them. And so I think you have to assume that this is all, like, that's gone. And I think if you check out our video that we had, our 50 Cent video, where we talked about the 50 Cent performing for the BC Lions, as well as just the marketing of the CFL in general. This is a team where they've had issues with attendance, with bringing fans in. Not saying that they don't have loyal fans there. They have incredibly loyal fans there. We're both friends with one of them, and they do have some great fans. And it's just one of those things where having a more consistent attendance would be really, really key to the Toronto Argonauts, as they got to figure it out. They won a Grey Cup and very, very recently, and even within that wasn't able to give them quite the boost that they were looking for. So hopefully they can figure that out.
So everything, to piggyback on that, everything's going to come down to their PR team.
Yeah.
Because what I've seen on social media, there's even people that have canceled their season tickets.
Yeah, it's not good.
Because of the whole Chad Kelly thing. Like, yeah, Chad Kelly is off doing his thing, getting the help that he needs. But, I mean, there's people that there's not even, get rid of their Chad Kelly jerseys.
Yeah.
Like, they're removing the nameplates off.
At the end of the day, there's all that stuff. But then, in addition to that, that's kind of tacking on to the already when it comes to attendance. This is already tacking on to the existing issue that the Argonauts have had, and so I think they need to see some proper promotion through the city of Toronto. It's one of those things where I've heard that they've apparently done some advertising. I'll put it this way: I've been to Toronto a few times in the past few years, haven't seen a single ad, not one.
But I would put that blame on MLSE.
It absolutely is on MLSE. But it's one of those things where if you're going to promote the team, which I think MLSE, that's their mistake, and they need to start doing that. You want the on-field product to show, and that's where this rests on the shoulders of Cameron Dukes. So overall, my prediction is that the Toronto Argonauts will finish second in the East. However, I think they will just narrowly beat out the next team that we'll be talking about in that race.
So
but I can definitely see them coming third.
The way that was the thing that I was just going to mention. Best case scenario, second. Worst case scenario, third.
Unless Ottawa plays out of their mind.
And then unless Toronto does not swim and they sink, possibly fourth. But I if they do as well as the team shows on paper, then they should at least.
And
be
that's
able
the
to
thing.
make playoffs.
Even though there's rest on Cameron Duke's shoulders when it comes to this team's success, with how much talent there is on this team, on the offense, on the defense, I just think they're a much more complete team than a team like Ottawa. So I think even in their worst case scenario, they beat the Red Blacks. But if I'm the Red Blacks, maybe looking to try to get in through the crossover, possibly. We'll see how it goes.
So,
but overall,
interesting note before we go to our last team. So, even if hypothetically Chad Kelly does come back, okay, their last few games of the season, they have Week 15 at BC, 16 versus Hamilton, 17 versus Montreal, 19 in Winnipeg, which yours truly will be at, and then Ottawa and Edmonton. So, I mean, the only way that I could see Toronto making the playoffs is if they at least pull 500 within the first half of the season.
Yep, nope, that'll be key. And overall, again, thinking second place is my prediction. You?
I'm going... See, it's hard to say because I want to say...
Got to make your pick.
I'm going to say third.
Okay. I can see that, and I understand that. And, you know what you're going to be excited about, Rick? Do you know what time it is? Team. We are on to the Hamilton
No, I'm kidding.
Tiger Cats, our fourth and final team in the East that we're going to be talking about today. And my goodness... This video is going a bit longer than I expected. I was expecting around 30 minutes. We're at 46, and we haven't started the team that you're going to want to spend a lot of time on.
Oh, my Lord. And I don't even know where to begin. But like I was saying earlier...
actually, I know where to begin. We need to talk about the players that were released, players moved to the practice roster, all that sort of stuff. Shall I get onto that, Mr. Rick?
You shall get onto that.
All right, perfect. So... we're going to go through the release players as well as the practice roster, starting with those cut today and who were released from the Hamilton Tiger Cats in their final cuts. Defensive lineman Mason Bennett. Defensive lineman Dighton Blacklet. Defensive lineman Anthony Federico. Defensive back Jonathan Gristini. Offensive lineman John Curtis. Wide receiver Jacob Patton. Running back Matthew Peterson. Offensive lineman Jacob Zott. Defensive lineman Mitchell Townsend. Wide receiver Omar Bayless. Defensive back Shakur Brown. Defensive back Arquan Bush. Wide receiver Chris Coleman. Tight end Michael Ezeki. Linebacker Aaron Hansford. Wide receiver Dev Holmes. Tight end Cameron McDonald. Defensive lineman Darius Meringue. Linebacker Marvin Pierre. Defensive lineman Adam Plant. Wide receiver Marcus Rogers. Offensive lineman Kendrick Sarter. Defensive lineman Derek Tangelo. Quarterback Kevin Thompson. Running back Calvin Tyler Jr. Wide receiver TJ Vasher. Defensive back David Vereen. Defensive lineman Cedric Wilcox. Punter Bailey Flint. Moving to the practice roster is linebacker Ryan Baker. Defensive back Patrick Burke Jr. Wide receiver Tyler Turnowski. Wide receiver Kalen Giger. Offensive lineman Brandon Camp. Defensive lineman Trevin Mason. Defensive back Mark Milton. Wide receiver Desmond Patman. Defensive lineman Kelly Sanders. Punter Kari Vedvik. That is all of the cuts and those who were moved to the practice roster.
So out of all teams, this team is the biggest changeover out of all 9 teams.
More in Saskatchewan?
Looking at this team...
More in Saskatchewan, you'd say?
Hold on. So of this team,
okay,
25 of the 56 were on the team last year, which means we've brought in 31 new players. 7 of the 8 defensive linemen are new.
Sorry? You said
31 new players we've brought in that were not.
Before that.
Oh, 25 of 56 players were on the team last year.
25 of 56. Huh.
7 of 8 defensive
So literally
linemen.
45% of the team is brand new.
Oh, more than 45% of the team.
That's 45%.
Oh, okay, well.
25 of 56 is 45%. But anyways, that's a lot.
So 7 of 8 defensive linemen are new. There's only sales from last year. If you include Ternowski on the practice roster, we only have 3 of 9 receivers from last year.
Yes. However, one of the players that the Hamilton Tiger-Cats have is the greatest long snapper to ever live, Mr. Gordon White. I'm sorry.
They 7 of 11 offensive linemen from last year.
Yep.
3 of the 9 linebackers. Yes, I'm including the defensive backs that play Sam linebacker.
Yep.
3 of them are from last year's team. The only position that pretty much is consistent is our secondary. And if you take out Elliott and put in Peters, but different positions, secondary is pretty much the same.
I see.
Looking at the roster, I think, okay, so the reason why Bayless was cut is because we brought back Stephen Dunbar Jr.
Yes. Coming back from Edmonton.
Then you include Shemar Bridges, who's 6'4".
Yep.
So they're going tall receivers. Then Milanovic wants to do this type of tight ends NFL look.
Oh, yeah.
So we have Giovanni Robinson. And this guy's good enough to play a forward position, if not center, in the NBA. This guy's 6'8". And then we have your friend, Brendan O'Leary
Orange. Yeah, this is a guy who, honestly, a guy like O'Leary Orange, great receiver, just never really got as much of an opportunity when he was with such a stacked receiver core in Winnipeg. But every time he went in, he was money. It was one of those things where he was very similar to Drew Wolotarski in the sense if he was never a guy you were going to send 40 yards down the field and throw a long bomb to. But if you needed 5-10 yards, he'd be able to get it done.
And then, so this is the first time I've ever seen them carry 3 running backs.
Oh, yeah?
So Butler, we already know what we're getting from Butler. Milanovic, he came over from Ottawa. So I would think that he's going to get a lot of special teams.
Oh, yeah?
Our season, it's going to be on Bo Levi Mitchell's shoulders. If not, it's going to be the same thing last year. Powell's going to run with it. I like our offensive line because the big 3, Revenberg, Baird, and Woodmansey are together. Murray's back. The only offensive lineman that's already injured is Figueroa. Going to the defensive side, me personally, I think that we have just starters alone. We probably have the top 4 defensive line.
And you're going with Barlow, Sales, Hendricks, and Menard.
And Menard from BC.
Yep. Yeah, no, Menard was good.
Yeah, in BC.
Yep, he was.
Then if you include Nick Usher and Martin.
Yep.
The only question that I have with our team is going to be linebackers.
It's funny. I'm letting you roll with this because honestly, I know you'll be able to tell.
Because Simone Lawrence is gone.
Yep.
Kyle Wilson was his backup last year.
And now it looks like he's going to be starting.
Yeah, he's starting middle linebacker.
The middle linebacker.
Flowers Lloyd led the team in special teams tackles. He's now starting Sam linebacker.
Yep.
And then Wilborn, who came from the NFL Denver Broncos, is starting Will linebacker.
Yep.
So, I mean, out of all the positions that we have, that's our least CFL experience group.
Yep.
But I mean, me personally, depending on how well if Mitchell plays the way that he should, and the way that he played in the one preseason game, I could see them finishing second.
Yeah, this is all good.
And depending on how Montreal does, I mean, the potential's there for first. Do I think that they're going to get first?
I highly doubt it. I'm not going to lie. I think Montreal has first locked up pretty significantly. I think the battle is going to be for second in the East. Now, because the thing that comes down to it when it comes to that battle is Cameron Dukes for Toronto. But then secondly, it's Hamilton has brought in a ton of players from all different walks of life, tons of guys, tons of talent. But how well does that talent mesh together? That's the question. True. And so I think we're going to – so let's actually one thing that I think will be interesting to go in about that. What is the Ticats schedule to start the year? Because they play week 1. They're on the road against Calgary.
Yeah,
and then week 2
to me, that's an easy win right there.
Week 2, they have their home opener against Saskatchewan. We'll be able to get to kind of see this new Saskatchewan team. So and they'll have their first game under their belt against
and then
Edmonton.
We have a home and home with Saskatchewan week 2 and 3.
Yep, and then you'll be on the road against Saskatchewan. So 2 straight games against the Riders.
And then Ottawa.
And then afterwards BC. So BC, in my opinion, is the first real game that I think – like the Ticats have a decent chance of losing. I think before that, even though there's obviously chances that they could lose those games, those are some games where I think they could really pick up some wins there. And the Ticats, if they're able to mesh quick, there's a real opportunity to have a hot start to the season. And so I think having that leg up on teams like Toronto, on teams like Montreal, is going to be really, really key.
Yeah. The only reason why I say that they have the potential to finish first is only if Bo gets back to the Bo that he was when he won MVP. And that's the only way that they would take down first.
Yep.
Can he? No. Does he have the potential? Who knows with Milanovic's offensive scheme and his playbook.
Yep, and this will be our first, and this is important to note, this will be our first year for Hamilton where they will...
Tommy Condell!
There's no Tommy Condell, and Scott Milanovic is at the realms from the start, in the sense of where we're getting to really see his playbook here. I mean, you were talking about how he's introducing some tight ends, really bringing in almost a more American style of football to the Hamilton Ticats brand. So we'll have to see how that kind of meshes with everyone, all the talent that they have. And giving those kind of tight end options for a guy like Bo Levi Mitchell. I'm really, really curious how he kind of deals with that in his playbook. And I think having a team that lines up differently offensively is actually to their benefit if they're able to make this work. Because teams for long enough have had their 40 defense, have had their 30 defense, basically just meaning 4-man front or 3-man front for the D-line. And so by lining up differently, introducing those tight ends, having a massive front there, you're forcing teams to have to adapt, to come up with defensive schemes just to deal with your team. And so I think it's one of those things where the more time that other teams spend having to deal on that, those defensive schemes just to handle you whenever they play against you, the more likely that there's other skills of their game that they're not spending as much time on, and the more likely they are for miscommunication errors, all that sort of thing, offsides, all that sort of stuff. And so with Hamilton, a key thing they're going to have is do not take too many penalties. I know
that's the other thing.
That was an issue you guys had. My Blue Bombers have had that issue before. I understand it. Hamilton last year took tons and tons of penalties. And so if there's any advantage by replacing half the team, if that was a problem, hopefully you got rid of that problem.
But Milanovic is the guy, and he's already said it.
Yep.
He is a no bullshit person where he will not put up with stupid penalties. He'll bench players if they take dumb penalties. And two things that I will mention before we wrap this up.
Yep.
So potentially they can get to first. If Mitchell is the MVP. If not, best case scenario is second, worst case scenario is third.
Yep.
Can they finish fourth? No, because
they would have to fall off a cliff, and Ottawa would have to play pretty darn good. It would have to be a collapse of spectacular proportions, but I don't think that's going to happen because they have the powers of the LA Extreme on the team. Scott Milanovich, the $1 million game.
And
we're not talking about how we didn't play it and that it was Tommy Maddox who played that game, but it's fine. LA Extreme. Sorry.
and not only that, but if you think about it,
yep.
If you look at the offensive or the coaches, Milanovich, offensive coordinator, head coach, new special teams coach, and you're going to recognize this name, Paul Boudreau.
Ooh.
We have a new quarterbacks coach, Roosevelt. He used to play for the Saskatchewan Roughriders back in the day. He's the new receivers coach. Glenn Young, new defensive line coach. Brandon Isaac used to play for the Ticats and Argos, new defensive backs coach. Michael Fletcher, new linebackers coach. And then, we only have, Washington and Mike Gibson from last year's coaching staff. We have a whole new coaching staff. So, I mean, the potential's there. It's just, can they get it done?
Yeah, no, that is the ultimate question. And so, overall, I think it's time we make our predictions. My prediction is going to be the Hamilton Ticats finishing third in the East.
So the only difference that me and you have is we both have Montreal first. I have Hamilton second. You have Toronto second. I have Toronto third. You have Hamilton third, and then we both have Ottawa fourth.
Yep.
And so, you're saying that there's no crossover in the East.
I did not say that. I didn't say that necessarily. I don't know. But I really don't know when it comes to crossover. I don't know. I don't think there'll be any crossover. Don't think it's that big a disparity, but I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of stuff in the West that's so unpredictable.
My thing is, I know we'll get into the whole West in the West preview, but the West is going to be so much closer this year.
Agreed.
That, I mean, unless two teams in the East crap the bed.
Yeah, I think there's still a definitive first and second in the sense of with Winnipeg and BC. Now, I will say it's less definitive of who is first out of those two, in the sense of there is a world where BC does win that and Winnipeg comes in second. But I think afterwards it'll be the battle for third between Edmonton, Saskatchewan, and Calgary. But we'll get on that. So finally, before we end it, I'm just gonna. I took away the logo. Whoops. Let me put it back.
Just before I give you the reins to end the episode.
Yep.
Week 1. I know we're gonna do a week 1 preview.
Absolutely.
But my question that I want to throw it out there and to our listeners.
Absolutely.
So Thursday, Montreal at Winnipeg. Friday, Hamilton at Calgary. Saskatchewan at Edmonton. And BC at Toronto. 3 Hall of Fame games of the week in that. Montreal at Winnipeg, Saskatchewan at Edmonton, and BC at Toronto. Either there's going to be 3 good games or there's going to be 2 one-sided games.
We shall see.
That we shall.
That we shall. So, overall, just going through it, once again, just to reiterate, we got my list is going to be Montreal, Toronto, Hamilton, Ottawa. Rick?
Mine is Montreal, Hamilton, Toronto, Ottawa.
That is our list. That is our predictions. That is our preview of the Eastern Conference Division, whatever you want to call it, of the CFL. Going into the 2024 season, we will have our West coming out once they announce their cuts so we can do it.
Which will be Sunday.
Which will most likely be
slackers.
Sunday.
They should have
make
done
sure
it
you guys
before
check out our review of the Week 3 preseason. as well as our preview, which will be coming out at some point, of our week 1 of the CFL regular season. So make sure you guys like, share, and subscribe if you have not already. And you guys take care, and we'll see you guys next time.